We are starting our 2024 position reviews. Most requested was shortstop. Jeff, you were not a fan of Brayan Rocchio's nickname, the Professor. I've got a nickname that I think everyone will like. It's a harsh one, but I think it'll be a funny one. That'll make people feel a little bit better about the year from Brayan Rocchio and the Guardians shortstops in 2024.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and everyone. Welcome to this shortstop special edition of Locked On Guardians. No, we're not going to debate who the greatest shortstop of all time was. That is a lively debate for another day. We're going to talk about how this past year went at shortstop in a positional review. But first, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can get a $5 new customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started.
As Jeff said, we will start positional reviews on the shortstop today. We'll do Brayan Rocchio. We'll talk about all stuff related to Brayan Rocchio. It's the whole Brayan Rocchio. No, it's not just Brayan Rocchio. We'll talk a little about Gabriel Arias, of course, the front office and coaching decision on shortstop this year. And at the end of the episode, we'll also talk about some shortstop prospects to hopefully make things a little bit better for people. Something to look forward to, right?
Yeah. No, there's I know people will be like, oh, middle infielders. Of course they have them. That's all they have in this system. But they've got a few interesting
not quite
guys.
True anymore.
Yeah, it's not definitely the pipeline. The problem with the pipeline was it was missing the end a bit of it. It's like it was a pipeline that got up to about AA and then just kind of, instead of getting to the majors,
fell off the curve.
Had a bit of a hole. I don't have a hole in my coverage. I've been here since the beginning of Locked On Guardians. Before that, I was a writer over at Scout 24/7 nationally. Featured on the John's Dash Hour show and just about every morning drive talking about the draft.
Yeah. I'm Justin Latta. I have been covering the Guardians minor league farm system since 2007 for various places such as Guardians Baseball Inside of the News Herald, the Morning Journal, where I have seen multiple shortstop prospects come through the system. And I was high enough on Brayan Rocchio, but I don't know if I was ever as excited about him as I was about some other shortstop prospects. Certainly some that I was higher on than him that I was wrong about, and some that I probably should have been higher on. Before we get started, I think we at least want to throw out our condolences to the family of Jim Donovan and just the community at large. Jim Donovan did do some work for the Indians back in the day and was obviously part of the voice of that. And truly in Cleveland, we have been blessed as fans to have a lot of good broadcasters out here. You know, the late Joe Tate was one of the best of all time. Of course, Tom Hamilton is amazing, and
Joe Tate's
Jim
the
Donovan
guy for me.
Joe Tate was amazing, and Jim Donovan was one of the best play-by-play guys for my money too. Truthfully, I can tell you, I have not really been a Browns fan the last decade or so, but Jim Donovan was all class when it came to play-by-play, and heard so many good stories about him, and he was just a fantastic play-by-play guy, and just going to be very missed in Cleveland. I feel terribly for him and his family and the Browns community who enjoyed him and the fact that they never won anything for him. Like that's the saddest part of all. And I don't want to have that conversation when it comes to Tom Hamilton. I'm not ready for that either.
Here's the thing for your comments below. For me, when I think of each one, when I think of the Cleveland baseball team and its iterations, it's like I think of Jack Corrigan, who I've talked about before. For basketball, it's Joe Tate, 100%, and for football, it's Jim Donovan. Those were my three voices. Living out of state, I listened to more games than I watched for a lot of years there. I was too poor to do the satellite stuff, so he was definitely. Sometimes I could groove it just right to get the transmission, or you could pay for it. And there was a time when I was in college where you actually got free radio broadcasts through Yahoo Sports. Like I listened to all the games down when I was in Ohio State because the Bengals were good during that time period and the Browns were not. So you could only, it'd always go to the Bengals broadcast. So I listened to a lot of Jim Donovan over the years. So best wishes to all. I know they're going through a lot right now. He's way too young, definitely. Way too young. Yeah.
It's been a very unfortunate journey of a lot of Browns broadcasters over the years. It's sad to look back at the history of how that's all gone. Yeah, certainly going to miss Jim Donovan in Cleveland and the NFL as a whole. He was really loved and respected. So best wishes to the family getting through a loss of a great person, family member, and member of the sports community. Turning our attention today to reviewing shortstop for the Guardians in 2024. So we will review every position. We're going to review short, second, outfield, catcher, first, third base. Hey, Jose Ramirez was great. Okay, we just did that. That's awesome. Bullpen, that was great too. We're done. So we asked the community who they wanted to hear about first, and surprisingly overwhelmingly, the answer was shortstop. I don't know if that's because everybody was so frustrated about what happened in 2024, or if they were curious what's going to happen in 2025. And I will tell you, most of our focus on the show is going to be about 2024. We'll kind of look at the offseason, but less about 2025 itself, more about what we think this has an impact for the offseason. Jeff, here's my new nickname for Brayan Rocchio. It's not going to be funny. People are going to probably maybe even say it's true. It's going to be harsh. My nickname for Brayan Rocchio was the Heartbreak Kid. I know that's a wrestling borrow from Shawn Michaels because Brayan Rocchio made 12 errors in the regular season. He is nominated for a Gold Glove, and errors are not always the best way to decide best defenders, although making errors is rarely good. He made 12 in the regular season, Jeff. 1, 2, 3 of them in the regular season led to runs. Technically, all 3 were Guardians losses, and those where they led to runs. But that means 9 other errors were non-impactful in terms of the final score of that game. But of course, in the playoffs, he made 3 errors, and guess what, Jeff? All 3 errors led to runs in that series. And it's not all on Brayan Rocchio. He did dye his hair blonde to get the Heartbreak Kid moniker. He did. He went to Shawn Michaels route looking for something sexy, as Shawn Michaels had back in the
day. Just a sexy boy.
Or Charles Nagy or Jarrett Wright did that. And look, he should have taken his cues from those guys, right? Those guys all dyed their hair in 2000, 1999, whatever it was. And they were all horrible. So maybe he shouldn't have done that. But yeah, Brayan Rocchio during the regular season. So I went back because one of our things we talked about was we thought that all of his errors led to runs, right? We thought it seemed like he didn't make a lot of errors, but when he did, they were impactful. So back on July 8th, he makes he misses a chance for a fielder's choice. A run scores, and the Guardians lose to the Tigers 1-0. On August 9th, he makes a throwing error. The Twins end up scoring a run, and they end up winning 6-3 in that game. That gave them their second run of the game. September 28th, he had a throwing error that allowed 2 unearned runs to score. The Guardians lost that game 4-2. Obviously, in the LDS, he had the missed pop-up that led to the New York's first run in Game 2. They lost 6-3. The error he made in Game 4, no unearned runs were accounted for in that game because they would have lost anyway. That run would have scored anyway. And they lost 8-6, and they didn't score runs. So I guess they would have lost 7-6. And then Game 5, we know what happened. All 3 of those runs were unearned. So that's why I said Heartbreak Kid. He dyed his hair blonde. He had a good postseason offensively, and then he broke our hearts with a lot of errors. So first question, Jeff, what did we learn about Brayan Rocchio in 2024? Was he a product of prospect overhype? Did he get too much hype and underdelivered? Or did he just simply underperform expectations of him?
Well, first I'll say too, the one thing I just want to is errors are weird, and that's why we don't really use them to judge players. So there's probably other plays that, that maybe should have been errors, or we won't judge that, like points that I appreciate you going through that data, but I just want to also throw out, like, errors are just kind of weird. They're kind of I don't know if I want to say a worthless stat, but it's like, because they're not consistent in how they get called and how they get done, it kind of leads to moments that make that hard to judge. I think there was
not all on him.
No, and but there's also points where he probably didn't have an error that he probably cost the team something too. It goes both ways.
There is one. I'm glad you said that real quick, because there was one, because one stood out to me, and I went back because I was like, I thought he got charged with an error on this one. And he didn't. He missed a double play on August 30th. He ended up getting a fielder's choice because he messed up a transfer from Jimenez at second base, and he got the out at second.
Hard time with transfers there late in the season.
He did. It was a weird thing. So he doesn't get an error charge there because you can't assume a double play. So he got credit for getting the out at second, and then he just missed it in the transfer. It would have been an ending inning double play. But the next 5 guys got hits in that inning, and it went from being a 4-0 Cleveland lead to a 6-4 Pittsburgh lead. Now Cleveland went on to win that game 10-8, so it didn't really matter. But the point is, you were right. He didn't get charged in the error on that play, but it led to a big inning later where it might not have if he just makes the play. And he's not charged in the error there, but, it ended up impacting the game, and thankfully Cleveland won that game. But you're right. Errors don't always tell the full story.
And I think he was a little overhyped, honestly, because like in the lower minors, like he was part of that group of like, this is the greatest international class they've ever had. You've got Rocchio and Valera and others, and all of these future stars. And it's like, the one thing with Rocchio is I was slow to the bandwagon, and then I jumped on fully because, Valera came in and hit the ground running. Like he hit the ball hard and well, and then he just kept getting hurt. Like that's a story for another day. Rocchio came in and wasn't that great in, I think, Mahoning Valley his first year. Like he definitely was one of those guys where I'm like, there's more comments on how pretty his swing is than how effective it is. And then he showed some improvement throughout the minors. But he was always going to be a limited offensive profile type of guy at best, like especially as we saw like when he got to like AAA last year. Like most people kind of cooled on him to varying degrees, myself being one of them. Everyone outside of I think Keith Law, and we've talked about this before. Like, yeah, his walk rate went up, but walk rate is not a predictive stat. Like that's just one of those things that like you can't really look at and say, yeah, that guy's going to walk in the big leagues. It does not transfer. And I honestly didn't think he'd be as good of a defensive shortstop as he's been this year. So maybe I got that wrong. Yeah, we can get in the debate about the position. I feel like there's a degree of overhype, but then I've talked about like the postseason, when bright lights were on, he felt like he couldn't perform well. If there was guys on base, he couldn't make contact. He had a great postseason as long as the bases were empty. And then, in season, the offensive production was pretty miserable. He was Miles Straw-esque at points. So, I think he is, we're not at this point about what's going to happen next year, so I won't get into that. But, I do think he was a little bit of overhype, and just also the downside of a guy who had a long pathway of hype. Like, I mean, he was hyped from a teenager. So then we spent, forever hyping him. So then that leads to just more expectation. And the number of times he got, mentioned in the same breath as Lindor, which was just ridiculous. Like, I mean, they were never even close to each other in prospect grades. Also led to some unhittable expectations.
I do remember a lot of people who wanted to think that that Rocchio is the next Lindor because people saw the batting stance looked very similar, right? Switch hitter, supposed to be a smooth defending shortstop. There were a lot of people who wanted to draw parallels to Brayan Rocchio or to Francisco Lindor. And I definitely thought there was more in the tank offensively. But when I saw him in the minors, I definitely saw a guy who was not Francisco Lindor. I thought this is a guy who can meet a league average bat at short and could be a plus defender at short. And he was an above average defender. He got nominated for a Gold Glove for whatever that's worth. The metrics liked him to be a positive defender at shortstop, which is better than what they were getting from Med Rosario. But I didn't think he'd perform offensively worse than Med Rosario. I truly didn't. I thought he'd be an upgrade because he would probably be as useful offensively as Med Rosario, but better defensively. And the one thing I didn't expect too was Rocchio is not a strong runner. The metrics show out like he's not a strong runner, which I thought was really weird. I never really would have thought that in the minors. He had a decent amount of stolen bases, but catching in the minors is different in the majors too. And catchers are better at throwing runners out. Pitchers are better at holding runners on, so that makes an impact as well. The thing, oddly enough, the walks did translate for him. He did walk enough, and part of that's passivity. And you and I have talked about how this team could use a little more passivity, truthfully, and that did help him out. I do think he underperformed expectations, but I think you're right. He had a long pathway prospect-wise, and we see this a lot where when guys are prospects and don't make their major league debut for quite a while, we've been hearing from them quite a while, you do get prospect fatigue. So we were hearing about Rocchio from the time he was 17 years old and 18 years old, and we thought, okay, everyone kept buying the Francisco Lindor replacement or whatever. And I think that hurt him a little bit, but also at the same time, he didn't live up to being a quality major leaguer offensively in the major leagues in his first 500 at bats. He's a below average hitter offensively at the major league level, and he's got room to improve. He's only 20. He's only going to be 24 this December or this January, so he's got time to improve. It's not like his career is over. And I do think there's some things he can improve on that will make him ready. We will talk about some of the other shortstops. We'll talk about the offseason plan for shortstop, and we will talk about some future shortstops. Hopefully, we don't overhype, but that's how prospects are sometimes. So we'll get into that here in just a second.
But first, we have to talk about our good friends over at PrizePicks. They like to make it easy on you. They like to do things that are simple like more or less. And that's how it works at PrizePicks. You're going to pick 2 to 6 stat categories, and you just say more or less. And often they'll give you one. I'm going to go check and see if they have a freebie right now. But when you're over at PrizePicks, you just go, you pick a sport you like. They have everything under the sun that you can do under their Play Now tab. And they have deals going on all the time. And right now, they have one of their best deals. I can also see right now they are loaded up with demons all over. Lots of those risky but high-paying bets. So head over to PrizePicks because of their fantastic deal, which is $50 instantly when you play 5. Download the app today. Go to the website, use the code LOCKEDONMLB, and get $50 instantly when you play 5. Again, that's code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly when you play 5. PrizePicks, run your game.
Some of the ways I think Brayan Rocchio can improve real quickly. I think adding some weight would help. He is a little undersized. I think some bulk might help him. Obviously, he's got to hit the ball harder. He was way lower and everything offensively. The only thing he really excelled in was walking and launch angle sweet spots. So he was able to get the ball in the barrel enough, but he didn't hit it hard enough to consider it a barrel. So I think a little bit of strength would help Brayan Rocchio out over the offseason. So we'll see if that's something he does. Let's move on to Gabriel Arias. This is going to be controversial. He ended the year in the minor leagues. There was a lot of split decision on him, and he is going to come into 2025. We're not getting into 2025 yet, but he is going to come into 2025 without an option. Did the Guardians fail Gabriel Arias, or did he fail himself? Because Brayan Rocchio came in with a lot of prospect type, but you know what? So did Gabriel Arias. I think some people thought Gabriel Arias was a better prospect than Brayan Rocchio, if you consider the fact that we thought Gabriel Arias could be a Gold Glove defender, and we thought he had more offense to give.
I think he failed himself, but I think more the organization failed him. And the reason I'll say this is Rocchio got the whole year. He got a full opportunity to prove himself. Gabby never got that. And to go back to 2023, I want to point this out again. I pulled up the stats. He had a positive defensive value while playing all over. And at first right-handed bats, he had a 118 WRC plus. Now he had a negative 12 versus lefties, which is just weird. And he was much better against lefties this past year. But a 118, I believe a 118 is what Josh Naylor had this past year against right-handed bats for a team that was deficient against right-handed bats this year. He was as good as Josh Naylor. And that's last year in a significant sample. He did end up getting, once they made their trades, he got more opportunities. He had 82 games, 207 at bats against righties, but he never got a full season to prove himself. For a guy who looked like the centerpiece of the Clevenger deal, they never gave. And part of that's the whole problem with holding on to Ahmed as long as he was, as limited as he was. Gabby, there was also points where we heard, reports of attitude, and that's where I think he failed himself, or maybe he felt a little too entitled. But he stated he felt more comfortable playing shortstop and not playing all over, that, that's where he wanted to be. And I think the organization does have some degree of fail with him. And like I said, I've talked about it. It would not shock me at all if someone like Tampa traded for him and he turns out to be a good player, just letting him do what he wants to do. We heard about adjustments he made in AAA. I'll be curious to see what happens, because with him being out of options, I don't know if there's a spot for him here next year, and he could be a guy that team could get very cheaply. If Cleveland wants to, add someone to their 40-man that you and I aren't anticipating, or if they do something else. But he feels like a guy that, I don't think he necessarily, you can put it all on the org. I think there is some player stuff there. And I know a lot of people were just done with him this year, but he also wasn't playing regularly. It's hard to get any type of consistency when you're not getting regular playing time. And then a guy like him is going to press like crazy, which leads to other issues. And I feel like this is one where I put a lot on the org.
Yeah, you're right. It does go back a lot on the Amed Rosario thing, right? Amed Rosario was not going to be the long-term shortstop in this organization. And if they thought last year in 2023, if they thought there was a degree of maybe we do want to re-sign Amed, if they thought there was any possibility that could be a decision they would make, then they should have made more aggressive moves to trade some of these infielders. If they thought that Amed Rosario was actually going to be here beyond 2023, they should have made more aggressive moves to trade one of these infielders so they weren't stuck with this logjam of guys they weren't going to be able to figure out based on playing time. So you're right. That decision goes back and that hurts him a little bit. And yes, he probably should have had a more adjustable attitude to moving around and getting opportunities. I think that was definitely a problem. But the players still loved him. Like you could tell the locker room still really liked him. Brayan Rocchio and Brayan Rocchio and Gabriel Arias were really good friends all year. They were celebrating together a lot when they were doing things. And the clubhouse still seemed to really like Gabriel Arias. I think that's a little bit too much. I don't know. He was not given any opportunity in 2024 to do anything that would have made sense because you never put him in a position where he was going to succeed. I'm all for bouncing guys around in versatility and trying to find ways to do it. The truth is, like, every guy is not going to be a David Fry where he plays first or he plays right or he catches or whatever. Like, that's great. It worked out for David Fry. That's not going to work for everybody. I like the idea and you want to try that, but the truth is that's not always going to work for everybody. And Gabriel Arias was a guy who had an immense amount of talent. Like he's got an incredible arm and range at shortstop. He's got power. He's got some of the best bat speed on the team. The one thing I'll say he doesn't really have is patience. So maybe it would have been a mistake because this guy is kind of a hacker. So I have questions about his approach at the plate, like I do everybody else's in the system or the team right now, outside of, Jose or Manzardo, I guess. But I think Cleveland should be terrified of trading him this offseason because he's out of options. He's got very little trade value. But this is another case. I don't want to say he's exactly Yandy Diaz because Yandy Diaz, I think, showed us a lot more at the big league level than Gabriel
Arias. And got
even
less opportunities.
Yes. Gabriel Arias got more opportunities and he's got more issues offensively than Yandy Diaz had, other than the fact that he just didn't hit fly balls. Gabriel's got more to figure out than that. But Cleveland should be terrified of trading him this offseason because he has little or no value. And if they decide to trade him, there's still a good chance that somebody else picks him up, like Tampa Bay, like you said.
There's some Isaac Paredes to his profile. And
he winds up being a good major league player, and they again have made the wrong decision. I'll give the Guardians credit for this. This is one thing I want to talk about. How did the coaching staff in the front office do in 2024 handling shortstop? I agree with the practice of saying they had to pick somebody, right? They had to pick between these two guys, and they said, all right, we decided on Brayan Rocchio. He's our guy. They didn't waffle. They put Brayan Rocchio out there, and they said, this is our guy. We're not questioning this. We're not questioning him. He's going to get run. We're going to see what he does. And he struggled. He struggled offensively. He made some weird defensive miscues at unfortunate times. I agree with the practice of letting these young guys go out because they didn't do this with Gabriel Arias, right? Maybe it was overcorrection to a point, but they didn't do this with Gabriel Arias. So I give them credit for at least giving Brayan Rocchio the shot, and who knows what's going to happen in 2025. So I'll give them credit for the practice. It didn't work out. Maybe this has helped them see the error of their ways, but they mishandled Gabriel Arias, and that's not to say that Gabriel Arias is going to turn into a great player. There's still a good chance he turns into a guy that does nothing in the major leagues, and he's just got all potential and no deliverance. But they never really found out either way with him the way they found out with Rocchio this year.
And it's unfortunate because that kind of is almost if you want to put a bit of a black mark on the end of the Tito time in Cleveland, it's not just, Yandy Diaz, it's not Gabriel Arias, it's even, Richie Palacios turned into a league average hitter this past year for multiple teams. There's this weird thing where they didn't give guys opportunities and to play a lot of guys who just weren't very good at various points. So I feel like Gabby probably gets traded. I do. I think he's going to get traded. I think it is a high, I don't know if I would say not a high possibility, but I think there is a good possibility that it ends up being one of those that looks foolish. But it's what happens when you don't they never gave him that run they gave Rocchio for whatever reason. And this is maybe the thing where they have, certainly they have the knowledge we don't have, but they decided. And I will say to a degree with his defense, Rocchio rewarded that decision.
He did. Would you be surprised to know that Gabriel Arias has only 40 more plate appearances in his career than Brayan Rocchio, despite the fact that he'd made his debut in 2022?
I'm not surprised by it. It shouldn't be, but I'm not surprised by it.
Yeah, Brayan Rocchio, 528 plate appearances in his career. Gabriel Arias, 563.
Yeah,
and that's over the course of
with almost
no
seasons. Consistency with only half a season of consistency. So what young player is going to excel in that situation? The answer would be none.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about more of those young players when we come back. We're going to talk about some of the prospects in the system, what we thought of their 2024 seasons, if we think they're going to stick at shortstop, and just more stuff on prospects. So we'll get to more shortstop talk on today's Locked On Guardians. Oh, what an interesting time in the NFL these days. A lot of weird stuff is happening. What a great catch by the Commanders. That was Noah Brown on Sunday on the Hail Mary. That was exciting. Get ready to tackle all the NFL action with America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel, because right now new customers can get $5, bet $5, and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. If you get a hunch in the middle of the game, maybe you think a Hail Mary is coming at some point, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. I gave you some bad advice on Ohio State last week on Saturday. I didn't like it either, so be careful about what you listen to from me. But visit FanDuel.com, join today, and you're going to get started with the $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Go out and find a bet that's a little easier than the Ohio State one I gave you, I guess. Put $5 out if you're a first-time customer and win, and you're going to get $150 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. If you're one of those people who is listening to the World Series, if you're still into it, the Dodgers, it's been a fun series so far, I have to say. You can check out all the action on your SiriusXM app, and you can also listen for daily recaps and insights on the postseason over at Locked On MLB with our pal Sully. I know he's having a lot of fun with it. It's been a fun World Series. I can't say it hasn't been. I know a lot of people aren't really able to listen or able to watch based on what happened to the Guardians, but hey, the Yankees are losing, and if you feel better about the Yankees losing, then the Dodgers are winning right now and 2-0 in the series. That's something.
I feel like it's hard to root for either team when they're the two highest payroll teams in baseball, active payroll teams in baseball.
I do agree with that to an extent. At the same time, you can also blame baseball's pay structure for that. They're just doing what baseball has allowed them to do, and other teams will not do, can't do, and hate the player, not the game. Or no, hate the player, not the game.
No, I think hate the game, not the player. Yeah,
I hate the game on this one.
That's a debate for another day. I'm not going to get us any more off task with this one, but yeah,
fair enough. All right. Shortstop prospects in 2024. So
there are none. The end. I'm kidding.
Yes, there are none. Not at the end. It's not an extensive list of upside. I'm mildly excited / curious about Angel Genao based on 2024. I saw a lot of great things from Angel Genao in 2024 in Lake County. So if you're watching on YouTube, we have a full list up of kind of the main shortstops we saw this year. We had Milan Tolentino at Akron, was kind of the primary shortstop. Alex Mooney played some games at Lake County at shortstop. So did Yordis Valdez in Akron. Angel Genao at Lake County in Lynchburg. Welbyn Francisca at the Arizona Complex League in Lynchburg. Jose Devers at Lake County. Garrett Howe was drafted this year, played some shortstop. And then Gabriel Arias, not that Gabriel Rodriguez, a new one, played in the Dominican. So those are some of the guys from this year. Obviously, for us, I think you and I both have Angel Genao. I think second or third. We never really came to a decision on whether or not Cal Manzardo has exhausted his eligibility or not.
There's a clear top three. And I know people will talk about the ladder. Well, this isn't an outfield thing, but it's just health with him. Like that's the issue. You got to be in games to be a top three in this org right now.
I don't have this on the list to talk about, but can we at least say Cleveland did finally trade some middle infield prospects this season for Lane Thomas, right? They traded Jose Tena and they traded Rafael Ramirez Jr. They actually moved. I was really high on Rafael Ramirez
and Furman for in the
they did trade Furman for Alex Cobb. Yeah, so they finally did move some in middle infielders. So
none of them in my top 30, I will say.
I started the year with Ramirez in my top 30, and he really struggled offensively. I still have a lot of hope for Rafael Ramirez.
Yeah. He was the highest of the three.
He's got a lot of upside. I think there's a chance
they would have all been in that 30 to 40 range for me, if I'm being fair and honest. But yeah.
So and now, obviously, the best of this group, I think, for us. Good. I want to compare to Brayan Rocchio a little bit here and see if we are going to overhype him or he's going to wind up facing the same fate as Brayan Rocchio. I think Angel Genao is already stronger than Brayan Rocchio.
Agreed.
If I had to just look at them, Genao was able to plug a lot of gaps in Lake County with authority. Like he was hitting the ball hard opposite field. And I think once he starts to get, Brayan Rocchio never produced those exit velos in the minors. So I am more optimistic about Genao's offensive profile based on that. Shortstop wise, I think he's got plenty of arm. I think he can stay at shortstop. I think there's some things to work on. Do I think he'll be a Gold Glover? I don't know. My other concern is that he might outgrow the position. He's still fairly young, and he put on not bad weight, but he put on some weight this year. He started to grow into his body a little bit more, and that's what helped the exit velos. Much more patient than I would have thought, by the way. And now walks, as they move up, as we talked about, are not really a stat you can count on to travel with you anymore. But I will say, I thought Angel Genao coming into the year, I expected a guy to be a hacker. He had a really good approach. He had a good two-strike approach. Often got himself back into counts if he was down. Showed some aggressive takes. I was really impressed. So I think the approach overall, I'm optimistic about overall with him. I think he's a future major league starter. He certainly is going to have a lot of trade value this offseason. I don't think he's quite. Yeah, I want to say double. I want to see what he does double A before I say that. Because high A performance anymore, even double A performance anymore, is not a guarantee. But the exit velos are good. Very mature kid too, by the way. I will say I heard a lot of people say like he comes from a very poor background. He grew up in Dominican Republic. I think I want to say I don't want to get that wrong, but I know where he grew up. That the story is that he had a house with no roof growing up, and just a very, very tough upbringing. And he is a mature kid, always smiling and positive. Loves playing baseball. You never see him have a bad day out there. Coaches love him to play. Yeah, Dominican. I thought so. I just I didn't want to be 100% wrong on that, but I got nothing but good reports from people this year on him about his attitude, and I'm just impressed with his overall maturity, and I'm very optimistic. The rest of this group we'll see. Welbyn Francisca for me is what scares me. I see a lot more. I didn't see Welbyn Francisca in person this year, so this is very grain of salt here, but I see a lot of similarities to Brayan Rocchio there. He's a little more thin. He's got time to fill out, but he's a little thinner. I don't know if he's a future shortstop. overall. But it's Angel Genao is not relying. I don't think is going to be all hit tool, right? I think we think there's some pop to that bat. Welbyn Francisca, to me, it feels like it's going to be a lot of this guy has to have the hit tool, or he's not going to be an offensive performer. Whereas Genao, I think, can do a couple other things offensively.
No, I agree. Whenever, and this is where, for a long time there, I would not rank guys at the level that Welbyn Francisco is playing in, because all it is people giving you a scouting report on a guy who's playing the equivalent of
complex leagues,
a good high school, like level, like he's playing, the elite of the elite. It's like the summer showcase probably for high school, for being fair. So it's like, yeah, he looks
showcase,
great.
Excuse me? No.
He looks great at the level.
The you know that.
It's I'm just always showcasing my talent on this show. But for him, he's a lot of guys. It's only a red flag if you don't perform well. But the reports are always about like, it's the stuff I hate. Oh, it's a pretty swing. Oh, he's got a good swing. It's like I don't care. Like, I go back to, I've been doing it long enough. I remember 2 years in a row, Tyler Naquin and Bradley Zimmer were widely considered to have the best hit tools in their class. And it's, like swing, right? Like it's people liking how a swing looks. Who cares? Like there is that degree, again, when we talked about go back to Chase DeLauder, where it's like when your swing's too weird, there's some concerns, but like good hit tool is not the same as a pretty swing. So it's like Welbyn Francisco, there are people who love him last year. I know when we discussed him for Prospects Live, there was some talk of putting him in the top 7 to 8 guys, and I don't remember where he landed. And you and I are both like, you can't do that. Like maybe he does turn into a future batting champion, but like that's what that's what that the profile is. That is the optimum outcome. I don't see, maybe you're hoping for league average power with plus hit, but there's a lot of risk, and B, it's that profile where it's the Mejias, it's the Freemans, it's that when you are putting all of your eggs in the hit tool basket, there's not a lot of ways for it to be successful. If anything, if he doesn't live up to the 100% outcome.
Yeah, to be fair, we both probably agree that we haven't seen enough on Welbyn Francisca yet to say definitively which way it's going. But there's things we've seen from him now that we're a little more optimistic about, whereas there are still things I think Francisca has to prove at this point to have the same level of optimism. And I just think they're very different players too. So I don't want to compare the two, but just in terms of where they are. And I also don't think Francisca is a future shortstop at this moment. So we'll see. I do think Genao has a chance to stay there. Mooney, I don't think he's a future shortstop, but he played there. Good reports there, minus his weird throwing accuracy issues. Valdez Valdez is a utility guy. Milan Tolentino's in the AFL. I don't think he's getting put on the 40, but he strikes out a lot. There's good defense, all that kind of stuff. Gabriel Rodriguez is another high-profile international guy who we just don't know yet, and we'll see. Garrett Howe drafted this year. We don't have much on him yet, other than
really good contact and chase rates, no power at all. The one thing I gotta say, I know you raced over him because of time. Lourdes Valdez was a 2nd-round pick, so that's that's one of those things where, again, it's like I go back to this. Hey, defense and contact at all costs. I'm glad we're seeing a change. Lourdes Valdez, when it was made, was a 2nd-round pick that made me sad in the moment, and
it's not looking good.
I mean, it's not bad. It's not often you see in Christian Cairo in that draft, same story. Like that was a draft that was, I mean, they hit on pitching, but the man, those 2nd and 3rd round picks, or maybe 4th round, not great.
Yeah. All right, for Tuesday show, guys, we're going to try something a little bit different, so bear with us. We hope you'll enjoy it. Trying to come up with different shows this off season, and with lack of news, the World Series is still going on. So Tuesday's show is we're going to rank the top 10 postseason home runs in Guardians history. Tuesdays are going to be top 10 Tuesdays until we feel like this is working or isn't working. We're giving something new a shot, so stick with us. So Jeff and I are going to rank the top 10 postseason home runs in Guardians Indians history. Feel free to give us your ranking in the comments or on Twitter as well. We'll be back with that on Tuesday with top 10 Tuesday. And feel free to give us other ideas too. If you have any ideas for top 10 Tuesday, feel free to throw them our way. We'll consider them. That's something we're going to try out this offseason to keep bringing you, different looks at things and different things about this team, history, current, all that kind of stuff. So give us some ideas. And also we're starting with this one. So give us your top 10 Cleveland baseball playoff home runs.
Yep. And thank you all for joining us. Remember, rate and review. It helps. Thank you to many of our everydayers like John and Dave and Zeev and Tom. Thank you for being you. And as I end every show, go Guardians, go.